I did a video a few weeks ago called Big Trouble for Small Farmers, and in that video I talked about some of the problems with the agricultural land reserve that is managed by the Agricultural Land Commission. And we really hunkered down on a story with Jody Lucas of the Rusted Rake, which is one of many. It's been a total disaster. And I kind of want to talk about why that is for some of those reasons, and then I'm going to talk about what I see as a solution to all of this. I have some very kind of troubling news with all of this that I discovered when I went to a meeting with some of the commissioners and the Deputy Minister of Agriculture. So some of the problems that the ALR has caused are, a lot of it has to do with buildings and secondary buildings with farmers, and a lot of that has to do with the succession planning of family farms, be it that a couple raised a family, had a farm, and then they want to retire, and so they want to build a secondary home for their children to move into with their family so they can help take over the farm. That's the number one. I've interviewed well over 20 farmers so far, and I've got a ton in the queue to interview more. I'm going to be publishing some of those here on YouTube, but I'm starting a new podcast called Liberty on the Land, and it's all about exploring these problems and solutions with farmers that are having trouble around the world about this. But so that was one of them. Also, a lot of it has to do with different types of innovative business models that farmers want to do that they can't do, things to do with agritourism, direct market sales. There's all kinds of stuff. But I would say the majority of people I've interviewed so far, the issue comes down to buildings on the land that the ALC, the Agricultural Land Commission, says they can't do. And the stories are horrendous.
It's important to point out here that the ALC actually has very little data about farmers that are in the ALR. At the presentation I was at October 10th, they didn't have any real data about farms. They don't even have a comprehensive list of all the farmers in the ALR, nor do they even define the word farm or farmer in the document itself. So you have to go to outside resources to find any of this information. And there is a document that was published in 2009 by the Fraser Institute that actually has a lot of really good hard data about the ALR. And I would encourage anybody who's curious about more of this information to go and check out that document. And that document is also very skeptical of the ALC, just as I am.
What they've done is they've made it so difficult for farmers to farm because of all this BS legislation that they have to go through, that they've really raised the barrier to entry to get into agriculture. They've made it more expensive, more complicated, that people don't want to get into agriculture. And in a time when we have diminishing numbers of farmers and the average age of a farmer accelerating or going up because people are getting out of the business, like when I was at this meeting last week, I was the youngest guy there at 40. Most people there were well over 65. And so anyways, the Agricultural Land Reserve, in my opinion, has been a disaster. One of the things it's done that's really easy to see is if you understand supply and demand economics, and I know lefties never really seem to understand this, you take one thing away, you create a scarcity, the price goes up. Go figure. But this is exactly what they've done in the Lower Mainland. They've pulled out so much land that can be developed to be in the ALR that they've created supply and demand, and so there's a scarcity, and so the price goes up. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that's the reason for high prices across the Lower Mainland. It's not the only reason. It's got to be part of it, though. Come on, supply and demand. It's simple. Anybody can see that. But I went to this meeting last week, and with the commission and the Deputy Minister of Ag, one of the commissioners was up there talking about mega mansions and saying this is a terrible thing we need to stop. Meanwhile, every farmer there knows in the Okanagan and most other places in British Columbia, this is not an issue. We're not worried about mega mansions being built on ag land. And you know what? I gotta say, so what? If a farmer has worked their ass off their entire life and they want to build a mega mansion on their farm property, what do I care? The other thing that really bothers me about the Agricultural Land Reserve is this idea that they need to have all of this land sitting for a potential time when it's all going to be used for farming, when everybody knows that farming in British Columbia has been declining. I'm not happy about that. I wish there was more farmers, but it's not the reality. But the reality of farming today is that farmers are more efficient on less land than they've ever been. And I know a lot about farming. And I've visited hundreds of farms across Canada, the province, and the world. And that's the case. Farmers are getting smaller, more compact, more efficient. They consume less resources. So why do we need to have all this potential land in the agricultural land reserve if it's never going to be used? And it is never going to be used. Like, let's be honest here. The amount of farmers is declining. And unless the BC government has some secret plan in order to get more people into agriculture, how is that ever going to happen? Especially when you look at the trends. Now, the trend that I see, and I said this at this meeting the other day in front of 50 farmers and some commissioners and a deputy minister, I said the trend is, and it's easy to see, the paperwork of all this BS, this commission, the Agricultural Land Commission Act, only gets bigger. So as the amount of farmers is decreasing and the age of a farmer is increasing, the bureaucracy and paperwork that you have to deal with to be a farmer is exponentially increasing. So thereby, in my opinion, they're decreasing the incentive to get into farming. And a number of farmers stood up and said this exact thing. I didn't even point this out. But how does anybody in the Agricultural Land Commission think in their wildest dreams that there's all of a sudden going to be all these farmers to use all this farmland? In what universe are they living in? Under what circumstance could that ever be possible when the incentive is decreasing to get into farming? It's going to get to a point in 20 years or less where you're going to need to have a lawyer on draw just to farm, because the bureaucracy gets heavier and heavier. And this is the thing. This is the thing that drives farmers crazy with the ALR, is that they make amendments to this act. And since then, they've brought in one called Bill 52, which was the big part of the controversy that was part of the reason for my last video about this subject. And then most recently, another one called Bill 15. When they pass these bills, they don't send a letter to everybody in the ALR saying, hey guys, just so you know, these are the new rules that you have to abide by. And if you don't, you could be in violation. They don't send any of that.
The fact that they don't do this is going to connect to what I believe is the solution. But there's a reason they can't send you a document in the mail that says these acts have been changed and they are now in force and effect. This is going to connect to a thing called royal assent, which is going to be the linchpin of all of this. And they cannot, by their own laws, put in writing that something has force and effect, because they cannot prove force and effect, because they cannot put royal assent in writing, because royal assent is not a thing that is done in writing.
All of a sudden, a bill changes and you had no idea, because you don't have time as a farmer to listen to all the rhetoric from these idiot politicians going on about this, that, and the other and increasing bills for this and that. You're too busy working on your damn farm. So how the hell do you have time to follow every little difference and bill that they add in the bureaucracy? You don't. And that is a crime, because what happens, and this was voiced at this meeting the other day, last week, with these farmers, is they said, you guys changed this, this, and this, and I'm going along thinking that I'm a law-abiding citizen, and then somebody complains about something, because a lot of the times the legislations are enacted on the individual basis by somebody complaining, saying, oh, there's a building here that shouldn't be, or they're doing something that they shouldn't be. And then some bureaucrat shows up and says, hey, you're in violation of this code and this code and this code and act and this section and so forth. And the farmer's going, I didn't know that. Nobody told me. So needless to say, I think the whole thing is a disaster. The Agricultural Land Reserve might protect farmland, but who's going to use that farmland if there's no farmers? Because the average age is increasing, the amount of farmers is decreasing, and the bureaucracy is only getting heavier. So in what world does this commission think that they're doing any good for farmers? They're not. And I think if they could get their heads out of the sand, they would see that. The problem with this is that when it comes to the Minister of Agriculture, the Deputy Minister, all the commissioners involved in the Land Commission, and all the bureaucrats that work in this, because this whole commission employs a lot of people, These bureaucrats and politicians don't get paid to get rid of bureaucracy to make the life of a farmer easier. They get paid to make policy. They get paid to write acts and statutes and bills and all this nonsense in the government world. They get paid to do that. They don't get paid to just say, you know what? Because if somebody was really honest and realistic and didn't just care about their own job, they could look at this thing, and I've read through this whole thing. They could look at this thing and say, you know what? This isn't really serving the interest of farmers. Why do we have this stupid thing? Why is there a Ministry of Agriculture? Who does it serve? Why don't we just get rid of it? Because they don't get paid to do that. So even though these bureaucrats, commissioners, and ministers might have the best of intentions, at the end of the day, they serve themselves, because if they were to go in there and be honest, they would basically be putting themselves out of a job. This is why I don't think we can win this politically. I don't think lobbying the NDP and going to Lana Popham, the Minister of Agriculture, or the Minister in BC of Agriculture, and saying, change this, that, you're going to waste your life. Because I really and honestly believe there's a bigger agenda here, and it goes beyond what's happening in this act. And there's a lot of people that commented in the last video that said the same thing, and I agree with every single one of them that said this, is that there's a bigger thing at play here, and it really comes back to Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. Now, I can't prove in those documents to say this part of this is tied to this in this act. I can't prove any of that. But when I've read those documents, what it looks like is they want to essentially get people off the land in the name of letting the land go back to wild, in the name of climate change, the big boogeyman that we all have today. The agenda is to get farmers off land and get people into cities. Now, I think the way I think of that is cities are factory farms and people on the land is free range. In a factory farm, you can control people, you can surveil people, and you can herd them a lot easier than you can control people that are free range. Because people that are free range, who live on the land, farmers, they're resourceful, they're autonomous, they're more individual, and they're community and family orientated. They're less controllable. People in cities are more controllable. That's my theory about the whole thing. And again, I can't prove any of that through the acts and statutes because I'm not that familiar with those documents, though I am pretty familiar with this document. I've spent quite a bit of time on this one. That leads me to the next part of what I want to talk about. The general population think the ALR is really good. You say, hey, what do you think about the ALR? They go, oh, it's great, protecting agricultural land, that's great. It's because they don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about all the BS that farmers have to go through to just do their job. They have no idea. They just think, oh, protecting farmland, oh, that's good. You know, it's like, oh, saving the planet, oh, that's good. The devil's in the details, right? And so that's a big part of the problem here is the average person doesn't understand that this is actually helping destroy the family farm because it's making succession really difficult for those that want to have a second place for maybe their mom and dad to move into, so that now they can have their new family and take over the farm, and you can have a family working in synergy and all this great stuff that should just be like common sense. That's being really halted. In today's world, if you want to be a farmer, and I've been working as an ag consultant for like 8 years now. And one of the things that I constantly have to do with my clients is I have to show them that they have to think outside the box. In today's day and age, and like this is market gardening in a nutshell, this is how most of you know me, is for my work promoting market gardening. You have to think outside the box. You have to make a business that isn't just about selling a product, right? It goes beyond that. You have to get into selling an experience, selling a service, selling value-added products. There's so many other things that you need to do if you want to have a successful small farming business. And most of the land that's in the ALR is actually under 10 acres. They said that in the meeting there last week. How the hell, in a world of globalization, that the government really supports globalization, how the hell are farmers supposed to make a living if they can't improvise and be inventive with how they sell their products, and they have to go and ask permission from this stupid commission every time they want to do something? It's insane. It's unsustainable. It's not going to work. And that's why I think by design this thing is meant to destroy farmers. Though I don't believe any of these commissioners, ministers, or bureaucrats believe that, but I honestly believe they're useful idiots acting out something that they don't understand. Now I want to talk about the solution and what I experienced that is quite troubling to me, to be honest. When I was at this meeting last week, this was Thursday, October 10th, one of the commissioners got up, and this was really interesting, and she did this whole spiel about how great the ALR is and how it's defending farmland, and meanwhile every 50 farmers in there are rolling their eyes, and everybody there just wanted to tell them the gripe they have with the policies. She said that she was referring to, I believe, Bill 15, which is an amendment to this that's coming. She said it was granted royal assent. She might have been talking about Bill 52. The point is, I want to talk about this issue of royal assent.
I'm going to play a recording here in just a second, but I want you to first understand something here. You're going to hear Kim Grout, who is the CEO of the ALC, say that a particular act was granted royal assent. So she says that. But I don't think they fully understand what royal assent is. And I pressed them on that, and I have this on recording. And then James Mack, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Agriculture in BC, he steps in and says, it has been granted royal assent, and the LG has signed off on it. Those are his words. James Mack is going to be very surprised when he goes to try to find that signing off by the LG, because it doesn't exist. Royal assent, I'm going to show you in a second, is a ceremony that's done, and there is no signatures from the LG. He's referring to the Lieutenant Governor. The Lieutenant Governor, who is the assigning authority of the Queen, cannot sign these documents. This is very important to understand. If a document is said to have royal assent, and they're claiming there is proof of royal assent, the only signatures that can be on that document are the Queen or her signing authorities, and in this case, that's the Lieutenant Governor. Nobody else can sign that document. Not a clerk, not an administrator, not a minister, not anybody. Only royalty, and that is the Queen or the Lieutenant Governor. That's it. So listen to this recording and hear what they have to say about it.
Question. So the bill was tabled in November. It received royal assent. It was brought into force and effect by regulation in February 22nd, 2019.
Is there a copy of that document with royal assent? Is there a signature from the Lieutenant Governor on that? Yeah?
I can't remember what the...
How can we access that? Because it's not online.
Yeah, it is. It's embedded now in the act.
Well, in fact, the whole act, it's right on it. It says that right at the top, it says copyright by the Queen's printer, and then it says this is not the official version. So how does the public attain the official version that has the royal assent? Because that's not public. And I've inquired about this, and nobody is willing to send it to me.
It is. I can send you the OIC. So
I think it's important that people understand that these acts have to have royal assent, and they have to have a signature from the Lieutenant Governor or the Queen. And I haven't seen that. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Maybe it exists. But I think it's important that if we assume that this is legitimate law that we have to abide by and have jurisdiction under, that it has royal assent.
So first off, it does. I'll give you my card. I'll send you the links. So we're talking about the Bill 52 change. So this one was signed off by the LG and brought into force in February. I can send
I'd like to see it to the Agricultural Commission too, because I can't find this either.
I want to show you guys a clip of a video. This is from the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, and this is what royal assent is. So that's the Lieutenant Governor sitting down, and then these two people, or one guy comes up, and he introduces the bills that are going to be read.
Present meetings thereof passed certain bills to which the name and on behalf of the said Legislative Assembly, I respectfully request your Honour's assent.
The following are the titles of the bills to which your Honour's assent is prayed. An Act to enact the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act 2015. Loi édictant la loi de 2015 sur l'infrastructure au service de l'emploi et de la prospérité. An Act to proclaim the month of June as Ontario Bike Month. Loi proclamant le mois de juin, mois de la bicyclette en Ontario. An Act to proclaim Terry Fox Day.
So they just stand there and they read out all of the acts in French and English, which is the Canadian tradition, and they go through a bunch. So we don't need to sit here and watch them read through all the acts. The video, it's a number of minutes long. There's no need to sit through all of it. But then here's what happens at the end of reading out the acts.
Ontario Inc.
In Her Majesty's name, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor doth assent these bills. Au nom de Sa Majesté, son honneur, la Lieutenant Governeur sanctionne ces projets de loi.
So that's it. She gives a nod. That's it. There's no signature. There's nothing. There's nothing in writing. It's a nod. This Royal Assent Act is pretty much the same all over Canada in all the provinces, and it's the same all over the Commonwealth, actually. There might be slight differences in where they stand and the exact things they say, but the whole thing is more or less the same. But check out this gold mine of a comment on the second comment on this video. Now, these videos don't get a lot of views because nobody knows about this stuff, and you can't go and even find an example of Royal Assent for every province because they just don't post these things. But check out this comment this fellow named Chado read. Evidence of fraud upon the Commonwealth of man and women of the landmass commonly referred to as Canada. Royal assent is granted by way of written declaration. It's called liability and accountability. It's also a record. A nod is not a binding contract. One could be saying, I heard you, or I agree and I heard you, but have yet to sign. Prove a nod as acceptance in a court of law. Good luck. Impostors appear to be committing treasonous acts upon the Commonwealth of men and women of Canada, privately making merchandise of men. Time will tell and accountability will be forthcoming. God bless. That is an absolute zinger. And I don't know who this guy is. This is comments a year old, but he is referring to some deep stuff here. This guy gets it. And he's also getting into some things that we're not going to talk about in this video. But like I said, this stuff goes really deep.
And that's it. There's no signature. There's no nothing. And let me ask you this. In what court of law, in what part of the world, can you say a deal or a contract is done on a handshake or a nod or a wink? Where in law can you do that? You can't. And there's something deeper going on with this. And I don't fully understand it. I think I do, but I'm not going to go on about it because I don't, like, this stuff goes back to the BNA Act, the Hudson's Bay Charter. It supersedes the Canadian Constitution. There's some deep stuff going on here, and there's a reason that they can't sign these documents. But the fact of the matter is, they can't prove royal assent. And I had an interaction with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency a few years ago where they wanted to come and inspect my farm, and I asked them for those documents, and they couldn't provide them, and then they backed away. They wanted to come and inspect me, and I said, okay, yeah, no problem. You can come and inspect my farm, but I want proof of royal assent on the documents. I want all documentation that says you have the authority to act under Her Majesty in good faith, and I also want a consulting fee. I kind of threw that in, and I put a tacit agreement on the bottom saying, that's what government documents do. I just use their boilerplate. You got 30 days to respond through registered mail, and if you can't do that, the offer's off the table. They never came back. So they tried to shake me down before, and I did that, not knowing as much as I know now, because this was 3 years ago, and it worked. So I think this whole thing is an act. It's an act. It's a scene in a play, and we're all acting in this play. The more you look at these documents, and I would encourage more people to do this, because I think we're being ruled by our own ignorance. And in a court of law, ignorance is complicity. And if you're ignorant, that's your fault. I think a lot of people are ignorant to what's happening here in the law. And this act, there is no proof of royal assent on this act, though they said it. She said it in front of 50 farmers, and the deputy minister reassured me that there is proof of royal assent. There's no royal assent. Royal assent is an act. It's a thing that they do because they know they can't sign the documents because they're repugnant of the common law. So, if farmers are looking for a solution and the government's been shaking you down, ask for where they get their authority from. Do they get it from the Queen? Do they get it from the Lieutenant Governor? Where is it from? You say it has royal assent? Well, prove it to me. Show me where the royal assent is. Show me the signatures. They're not on any of these documents. And even on this document itself, it's kind of funny because it's like right on the top here in the margin of the document, it says copyright the Queen's printer. Like that means something special. And maybe it does in that, only certain bureaucratic offices can print documents that have legislation. Okay, fair enough. So that, but it seems to symbolize something about the Queen. Yet there's no signature from the Queen in this document. And when I pressed them on it, they said, "Oh, we can get it to you." It's like, well, if it does have force and effect, and it has been signed by a lieutenant governor or the Queen, why can I not access that online? Why could that document not be accessible to every Canadian? Because this whole thing is because everybody's ignorant to this stuff. Nobody understands the law. Nobody understands how these acts and statutes work. They put on this dog and pony show so that we all go, oh, look at all those guys dressed in their fancy robes and they're big books and they do this whole ceremony and wow, that looks really fancy. I'm convinced now. It's all BS. And how far you want to take that, I don't know. I'll tell you what, I'm not in the ALR. I don't really have much of a dog in this race. I do in the sense that I work with farmers, and I've been all over the province, and I've worked with farmers all over the world. And this same stuff is happening everywhere. They're trying to push farmers off the land, and they're using the pen. The pen is mightier than the sword to do it. They're disincentivizing farmers because they're making the bureaucracy so nebulous and so regulated that they're creating incentives to not get into it. And so that's not going to change, and that's why I don't think we can win this politically. So I think it's time that we call a spade, and we say that this is BS. You don't have authority. So maybe we can find common ground. Maybe we can say, okay, maybe the government can say, hey, okay, this is BS. Maybe they'll realize that, and we can find common ground. I know there's some people that think the ALR is a good idea. I'm not one of them. And I maybe know 2 or 3 that do. But the dozens that I've interviewed and the pile that in my inbox that I have to go through for this podcast don't. And that's where I stand. And you guys can look into these things yourself. Look for proof of royal assent on any of these docs and ask for it. Because if they can't provide it, they don't have jurisdiction. So I'll leave it there, you guys. Again, leave your questions and comments below. Email me if you have a story. I want to change public opinion about the ALR because I think it's a disaster, and I think all regulation across the world with agriculture is a disaster. Email me story@libertyontheland.com. I'm collecting stories, I'm collecting testimonies, and I'm going to be sharing these to help sway public opinion about regulation in agriculture because I don't think it serves anybody.